The fluorescent lights of the local suburban Ohio Walmart hummed a low, relentless tune, casting a sterile glare over the chaotic aisles. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, a day that felt less like a holiday prelude and more like a competitive contact sport. Carts collided, toddlers had meltdowns near the cranberry sauce, and the air was thick with the collective anxiety of 100 stressed homemakers. In the center of it all stood Amy. At 48, she had the kind of quiet, steady resilience that usually goes unnoticed. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a practical clip, a few stray strands sticking to her forehead. She wore her comfortable, sensible sneakers, the ones she wore for her 9-to-5 job as a bookkeeper at a busy dental clinic, and a faded navy blue cardigan. Her hands, dry from washing dishes and filing paperwork, gripped the handle of her shopping cart so tightly her knuckles were white. Inside the cart sat a 22-pound organic free-range turkey. It cost nearly 3 times what a standard turkey would have, but her daughter-in-law Jessica had been very specific. "It has to be organic, Mama Amy," Jessica had said, her voice dripping with that practiced, breathless sweetness she used on her Instagram stories. "Tyler's digestion is just so sensitive these days, and honestly, the factory-farmed ones are just full of toxins. You want us to be healthy, right?" Amy stared down at the frozen bird, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. Beside the turkey sat a small mountain of expensive specific requests. Gluten-free graham crackers for the pie crust, artisanal vegan butter, a specific brand of sparkling cider that was only sold in the specialty aisle, and 3 different types of imported cheeses for the charcuterie board Jessica had insisted was an absolute must-have to impress their guests. Guests. That was another thing. It wasn't just going to be Tyler and Jessica. It never was. Amy pulled her smartphone from her purse and opened her banking app. She held her breath as the screen loaded. The balance in her checking account was lower than she'd anticipated. The unexpected brake repair on her 10-year-old Honda sedan last week had taken a painful bite out of her budget. She chewed on her bottom lip, her thumb hovering over the screen. With a familiar, sickening feeling of resignation, she tapped the screen, transferring $300 from her meager savings into her checking account. It was money she had been slowly, painfully putting away to finally replace her failing water heater before the harsh Ohio winter truly set in. But the water heater would have to wait. Tyler and Jessica couldn't have a subpar Thanksgiving. She had been a widow for 15 years. Raising Tyler alone had been a marathon of double shifts, skipped meals, and quiet sacrifices. She had done everything in her power to ensure he never felt the absence of his father, or the crushing weight of their financial reality. She had paid for his college, co-signed his first apartment lease, and even dipped into her retirement fund to help pay for his lavish wedding to Jessica 3 years ago. She had thought, naively, that once he was married and settled, the financial and emotional bleeding would stop. Instead, it had only morphed into a different, more sophisticated kind of drain. As she pushed the heavy cart toward the checkout lanes, her phone vibrated in her pocket. The screen flashed a picture of Jessica, perfectly contoured and smiling brightly against a backdrop of a high-end coffee shop. Amy paused in the middle of the aisle, taking a deep breath before swiping to answer. "Hi, Jessica," Amy said, trying to keep the exhaustion out of her voice. "Mama Amy, hi." Jessica's voice was unnaturally bright, the kind of volume that forced Amy to pull the phone an inch away from her ear. "Just checking in on the Thanksgiving prep. Did you manage to find the truffle honey for the cheese board? I swear if we don't have it, the whole flavor profile is ruined." "I found it, Jess," Amy said, maneuvering her cart around a woman arguing with a clerk about stuffing mix. "It was $14 for a tiny jar, but I got it." "Oh, perfect. You're literally a lifesaver," Jessica chirped. There was a pause, the kind of deliberate silence Jessica always used before dropping a burden. "So listen, Tyler and I were looking at our budget this month, and things are just super tight." Amy closed her eyes. She knew exactly where this was going. "Tight? Yeah, it's just crazy right now. We finally got the new Tesla delivered, which we absolutely needed for Tyler's image at work. You know how competitive it is. But the down payment just wiped us out. So we aren't going to be able to chip in for the groceries this year like we promised." They hadn't chipped in last year either, or the year before. But Amy simply nodded, even though Jessica couldn't see her. "It's fine, Jessica, I have it handled." "You are an angel. Seriously, what would we do without you?" Jessica didn't wait for an answer. "Oh, and one more tiny favor. Since Tyler invited his boss Richard and Richard's family, We really need the house to look pristine. Could you make sure the guest bathroom upstairs is completely scrubbed? Like deep cleaned? I noticed some water spots on the mirror last time we were there. And maybe clear out all your sewing stuff from the spare room so there's a place for people to put their coats? Amy felt a dull ache behind her eyes. After working 40 hours a week managing spreadsheets, she had spent all weekend dusting, vacuuming, and polishing her modest 3-bedroom home. Her sewing room was the only space that was truly hers. I cleaned the downstairs bathroom, Jess. The guests won't need to go upstairs. Mama Amy, please. Jessica's voice took on a slightly whining, condescending edge. Richard is a huge deal. He's very traditional, very old school. If he thinks Tyler comes from a messy background, it could subconsciously affect his decision about the regional manager promotion. We just need everything to be flawless. It's for Tyler's future. You want him to succeed, don't you? The ultimate trump card. Tyler's future. It was the lever they always pulled, knowing Amy would never say no to anything that benefited her son. I'll clean the upstairs, Amy said softly, the fight completely draining out of her. Thank you. You're the best. We'll see you Thursday at noon. Don't forget to wear something nice, okay? Maybe not that old floral apron. Love you. Bye. The line went dead. Amy stood perfectly still for a moment, the bustling noise of the supermarket fading into a white buzzing static in her ears. Don't wear the old floral apron, the apron Tyler had made for her in a high school home economics class. She swallowed the hard lump in her throat, pushed her shoulders back, and walked toward the register to pay for the extravagant groceries with her delayed water heater money. The drive home was quiet. The November sky was a flat, bruised purple, threatening freezing rain. When Amy finally hauled the heavy grocery bags into her kitchen, her lower back was screaming. She unpacked the organic turkey, the specialty cheeses, the expensive wine she couldn't afford but bought anyway because Tyler liked to show off. She organized everything meticulously in the fridge, her hands moving on autopilot. It was nearly 7 in the evening, and she hadn't eaten since a piece of toast at 6 in the morning. She poured herself a glass of tap water, leaned against the laminate kitchen counter, and stared at the empty, quiet room. The house felt too big, yet incredibly suffocating. She needed to prep the brine for the turkey. She remembered saving a specific, complicated cider brine recipe Jessica had sent her weeks ago, but her own phone battery had died during the grocery trip. She plugged her phone into the wall charger and glanced around. Sitting on the edge of the kitchen island was Tyler's old iPad. He had left it there 2 weeks ago when he came by to borrow her power washer, promising to pick it up later, but never doing so. She knew the passcode. It was his birth year and his childhood dog's name, something he hadn't bothered to change in a decade. Amy wiped her hands on a dish towel, picked up the iPad, and typed in the code. She opened the Safari browser, intending to search her email for the recipe. The browser didn't open to Google. It opened directly to the web version of WhatsApp. Tyler must have been using it to message people while his phone was charging during his last visit. Amy went to close the tab, not wanting to pry into her son's business, but a bold, unread notification popped up at the top of the chat list. It was a group chat titled, "Escape the Suburbs." The most recent message preview caught her eye, freezing her fingers over the screen. It was from Jessica. Jessica. Just secured the bag, ladies. The old lady is covering the entire Thanksgiving spread. All organic, too. Didn't even put up a fight when I told her about the car. Amy's breath hitched. The old lady. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a slow, heavy thudding that echoed in her ears. Her rational mind told her to close the screen, to walk away, to protect herself from whatever was in there. But her hand betrayed her. Her trembling index finger tapped the chat. The screen filled with messages. There were 4 people in the group, Jessica, Tyler, and 2 of Jessica's bridesmaids, Chloe and Madison. Amy scrolled up, her eyes scanning the text, the words burning into her vision like hot ash. Tyler. Thank God. I was not about to drop $400 on groceries when we need every cent for the Aspen cabin deposit. Chloe. Wait. You told her you couldn't afford it because of the Tesla? Did she actually buy that? Jessica. Of course she did. She's so gullible. You just have to mention Tyler's future or his career, and she literally folds like a cheap lawn chair. It's almost too easy. Madison. Lomo, doesn't she ever catch on? Jessica. Nope. She's completely obsessed with being the martyr mother. It works out perfectly for us, though. By making her host and pay for all the holidays, We've managed to save almost $3,000 since summer. Amy gripped the edges of the iPad. The kitchen felt like it was spinning. $3,000. The exact amount she had loaned Tyler in July when he claimed he was behind on rent and facing eviction. She had canceled her first vacation in 5 years, a modest trip to see her sister in Florida, to give him that money. She kept scrolling, unable to stop the masochistic urge to see the bottom of the abyss. Tyler. Just told her Richard is coming. I bet she's scrubbing the baseboards right now. Jessica. I had to tell her to hide that hideous floral apron she always wears. It smells like old potpourri and desperation. Richard's wife wears Chanel. I can't have Amy waddling around looking like a cafeteria worker. Chloe. Is her house still full of all that tacky wooden furniture? Jessica. Ugh, yes. It's so depressing. Honestly, the only reason we even go over there is for the free food and because it makes us look like a good, grounded family to Tyler's boss. Once he gets the promotion, we are strictly doing holidays at resorts. Tyler. Preach. Aspen is going to be insane. No cheap boxed wine this Christmas. Amy stopped reading. The iPad slipped from her hands, clattering onto the kitchen island. The screen stayed bright, illuminating the quiet, dark kitchen, the harsh words still visible. Gullible. Cheap lawn chair. Cafeteria worker. Desperation. For a long minute, she couldn't breathe. The pain wasn't sharp. It was a massive, crushing weight in the center of her chest. It was the sensation of a foundation giving way, of realizing that the house you had spent your entire life building was made of rotten wood. She leaned over the sink, gripping the cold porcelain edges, a dry sob tearing at her throat. All the years of exhaustion, the skipped lunches, the worn-out shoes, the lonely nights balancing a checkbook down to the penny so her son could have the best of everything. She hadn't been raising a family. She had been funding a lifestyle for 2 people who viewed her as nothing more than an ATM and a free maid service. She looked up, catching her reflection in the dark window above the sink. She saw a tired, aging woman in a faded cardigan. The old lady. The tears came then, hot and fast. She cried for the money she had lost, for the water heater she wouldn't buy, for the vacation she never took. But mostly she cried for the illusion of love she had clung to so desperately. She had loved her son with a fierce, unconditional devotion, and he had commodified that love. She cried until her chest ached and her throat was raw. And then the tears stopped. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Amy stood up straight, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She looked down at the iPad again. The sadness that had threatened to drown her was rapidly receding, leaving behind something cold, hard, and entirely unfamiliar. Clarity. It was a sharp, diamond-hard clarity. She walked over to the refrigerator and opened the doors. The organic turkey sat on the bottom shelf, large and pale. The expensive cheeses were neatly stacked in the deli drawer. The truffle honey sat on the counter. She looked at the clock. It was 8:15 p.m. on Tuesday. Thanksgiving was Thursday at noon. Jessica and Tyler thought she was a cheap lawn chair. They thought she was a prop to impress a boss she had never met. They thought she would quietly absorb the insult, cook their food, clean their toilets, and fade into the background so they could post perfect photos and save money for their ski trip. Amy picked up the jar of truffle honey, feeling its weight in her hand. She didn't throw it. She didn't scream or break anything. There was no need for dramatics. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, which had enough charge now to turn on, and opened her contacts. She scrolled past Tyler's name, past Jessica's, and found the number for a property management company she had briefly looked at months ago, back when she had fantasized about taking a solo weekend trip. She tapped the screen and dialed. A representative answered on the second ring. "Hello, yes," Amy said, her voice completely steady, void of any tremor. "I'm looking for a short-term cabin rental in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Something isolated. And I need it immediately. Starting tomorrow morning," Gemini denied. The woman on the other end of the phone had a thick, comforting southern drawl. She confirmed the reservation with a few clicks of her keyboard. A secluded one-bedroom A-frame cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, tucked away at the end of a private dirt road. No neighbors, no Wi-Fi, and most importantly, a 4-hour drive from the suburban Ohio nightmare Amy was currently standing in. "Check in as any time after 2 o'clock tomorrow, honey," the agent said. "You just use the lockbox, and it's pet-friendly, so your dog is welcome." "Thank you," Amy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much," When she hung up, the kitchen was still dead quiet. The iPad remained on the island, a glowing rectangle of betrayal. Amy didn't touch it. She didn't need to read the messages again. They were already branded into her memory. A cheap lawn chair. Desperation. She walked into the living room where her 10-year-old golden retriever mix, Barnaby, was asleep on his orthopedic bed. He thumped his tail against the rug as she sat down beside him, burying her face in his soft golden fur. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had been replaced by a strange, humming energy vibrating just beneath her skin. It was the feeling of a heavy, rusted chain finally snapping. She barely slept that night. Instead of tossing and turning with anxiety over turkey roasting times and seating charts, she lay awake making mental lists of a completely different nature. Wednesday morning arrived with a pale, icy light filtering through the blinds. Normally, this would be prep day. The day Amy's kitchen turned into a flour-dusted, butter-scented war zone. She would usually be up by 5, boiling potatoes, chopping celery, and setting the good china that she spent hours polishing. Today, she woke up at 7, made herself a strong cup of Black Folgers coffee, and sat at the kitchen island, staring at the raw, 22-pound organic turkey dominating the bottom shelf of the open refrigerator. At exactly 8:30 a.m., her phone buzzed. Tyler. Amy let it ring 3 times, watching his name flash on the screen, feeling her pulse remain steady and calm. She took a slow sip of her coffee and answered. "Morning, Mom." Tyler's voice was loud, vibrating with a frantic artificial energy. He sounded like he was pacing. "Listen, don't speak, just listen. I have incredible news. Game-changing news." "Okay," Amy said smoothly. "I just got off a golf simulator session with Richard. Richard Vance, my boss, the guy who holds the keys to the regional director position." Tyler paused for dramatic effect. His wife's family canceled on them for Thanksgiving. They were going to go to some stuffy country club, but I stepped in. I told him nothing beats a real, home-cooked, traditional American Thanksgiving. So they're coming to your house tomorrow. Amy looked at the expensive artisan cheeses she had bought with her water heater money. "Richard is coming here." "Yes. Him, his wife Eleanor, and their college-age daughter. Mom, this is it. This is the networking opportunity of a lifetime. If Eleanor likes Jessica and Richard likes the vibe, that promotion is basically mine." Tyler's breathing was shallow, his excitement palpable. "But here's the thing. We need to pivot. Hard." "Pivot," Amy repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Yeah, the turkey is too rustic. Too basic. Richard is a steak and seafood guy. I need you to go to that high-end fish market downtown, the one by the financial district, and get lobsters. Live ones. We'll do a surf and turf. And get some prime rib, too. Jessica will send you a list of new sides. We need asparagus bundles wrapped in prosciutto, not that green bean casserole with the fried onions you always make. Eleanor Vance does not eat canned soup." Amy traced the rim of her coffee mug. "Lobster and prime rib for 12 people, Tyler. Do you have any idea how much that costs?" "Mom, look at the big picture." Tyler's tone shifted, taking on that sharp, condescending edge he used when he felt she was being slow. "It's an investment. When I get this promotion, my salary bumps up 40%. I'll pay you back. I promise. Just put it on your credit card for now." "I'll pay you back." The exact phrase he had used when he borrowed $3,000 for rent while secretly booking a ski cabin in Aspen. "And Mom, one more thing," Tyler added, lowering his voice as if sharing a corporate secret. "Jessica mentioned this yesterday, but I really need to hammer it home. Please, for the love of God, do not wear that ratty floral apron when they get here. Wear that nice navy blazer I bought you for Mother's Day 5 years ago. And hide the weird wooden angel centerpieces. We want the house to look sophisticated, not like a retirement home craft fair, okay?" There it was, the final echoing confirmation of everything she had read on the iPad. He didn't want a mother. He wanted a caterer and an unpaid location manager. Amy looked out the window. The neighbor's oak tree was completely bare, its branches stark against the gray sky. "Okay, Tyler," Amy said. Her voice was terrifyingly gentle. "I understand completely." "Awesome! You're the best, Mom. Seriously, I gotta run. I have a Zoom call. See you tomorrow at 1 o'clock sharp. Have the lobsters ready to boil." He hung up. Amy slowly pulled the phone away from her ear, set it face down on the counter, and exhaled. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen. It was time to strike the set. She moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency she didn't know she possessed. She walked to the hall closet and pulled out a sturdy canvas duffel bag. She didn't pack the navy blazer. She packed thick wool sweaters, her worn-in hiking boots, thermal socks, and a pair of comfortable fleece sweatpants. Then she returned to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator and began to dismantle the holiday she had paid for with her own sweat. She grabbed the insulated grocery tote and packed the $14 truffle honey. She packed the 3 blocks of imported cheese. She grabbed the expensive bottle of Pinot Noir she had bought for Tyler and the sparkling cider she had bought for Jessica. These are going to the mountains, she thought. Barnaby and I are going to have an excellent charcuterie board. But what about the rest? The potatoes, the fresh cranberries, the massive 22-pound symbol of her gullibility? Amy hoisted the heavy turkey into her arms, grabbed the bag of potatoes and the celery, and walked out her back door. The cold November wind bit at her cheeks as she crossed the frost-covered grass toward the fence separating her yard from Martha's. Martha was 70, a retired schoolteacher who missed nothing and suffered no fools. She was on her back porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, smoking a clandestine Virginia Slim cigarette. She raised an eyebrow as Amy approached, carrying a bird half the size of a toddler. "Martha," Amy said, resting the turkey on the wooden railing, "do you have room in your chest freezer?" Martha took a slow drag of her cigarette, her sharp blue eyes scanning Amy's face. She didn't ask questions right away. She just nodded. "I always have room. What's going on, Amy? You look like you just walked out of a burning building." "I did," Amy said softly. She handed the turkey over, followed by the bags of expensive produce. Then Amy reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of printer paper. Last night, before the iPad died completely, she had taken screenshots of the group chat and printed them out on her home office printer. She handed the paper to Martha. "I'm going away for a few days," Amy said. "Tyler and Jessica are planning to show up here tomorrow at 1 o'clock with Tyler's boss. They think I'm inside, boiling lobsters and wearing a blazer." Martha unfolded the paper, adjusting her reading glasses. She read in silence. As her eyes tracked down the page, her jaw tightened. The cigarette burned down near her knuckles. When she finished, she folded the paper meticulously and tucked it into the pocket of her cardigan. "Aspen," Martha spat, the word dripping with venom. "Using your money for Aspen while making you scrub their toilets. I always knew that girl was a viper, but Tyler is a fool." "I'm leaving the house empty, Martha," Amy said, her voice steady. "I'm locking the doors, turning off the heat, and taking my dog to the mountains. I wanted someone to know, in case they try to spin a story, in case they tell everyone I went crazy." Martha reached out and placed a warm, dry hand over Amy's. "You take your time in those mountains, Amy. Breathe the air. Don't you worry about a thing back here. If those leeches show up and start making a scene, I've got the police dispatcher on speed dial, and I've got this piece of paper. You just go." A genuine, deeply felt smile broke across Amy's face for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Martha." Back inside her house, the real work began. Amy didn't just pack. She systematically shut down the lifeblood of the home. She walked down to the unfinished basement. The concrete floor was cold through her shoes. She stood in front of the gray metal breaker box on the wall. She opened the panel, tracing the labeled switches with her finger. She didn't turn off the main power. She didn't want the pipes to freeze and burst, destroying her own property. But she flipped the breaker for the hot water heater. Let the water run ice cold. She flipped the breakers for the oven, the stove, and the kitchen outlets. She went back upstairs to the hallway thermostat. Jessica was always complaining that Amy kept the house too cold at 68 degrees to save on gas. Amy pressed the down arrow, holding it until the digital display read 50 degrees. Just warm enough to keep the house alive, but cold enough to see your breath if you sat still too long. She unplugged the coffee maker. She took the extra rolls of toilet paper from the downstairs bathroom and locked them in the trunk of her Honda, leaving only a nearly empty cardboard tube on the dispenser. It felt petty, incredibly petty, but as she did it, a sharp, surprising bubble of laughter escaped her throat. It felt incredibly good. By noon, the car was packed. Barnaby was sitting in the back seat, his tail thumping happily against the upholstery, completely unaware of the rebellion he was participating in. Amy stood on the front porch, the freezing wind whipping her hair around her face. She held a thick black Sharpie and a piece of heavy cardstock she had found in her desk. She didn't write a manifesto. She didn't write an angry letter demanding apologies or explaining her pain. That would mean giving them her energy, giving them something to argue against. She wanted to give them nothing, a complete, unyielding void. She uncapped the marker and wrote in neat, measured handwriting, "I am away for the holiday weekend. The house is closed. Please make your own arrangements. Amy." She took a roll of heavy packing tape and secured the note to the glass of the front storm door, right at eye level. There was no missing it. There was no misinterpreting it. She double-checked the deadbolt, pulled her coat tight around her, and walked down the driveway to her 10-year-old car. The one Jessica thought was an embarrassment. The one she had sacrificed fixing to fund their groceries. When she started the engine, the heater immediately kicked in, blowing warm air over her cold hands. She put the car in drive and pulled out of the neighborhood, passing the inflatable turkeys and cornucopias sitting on her neighbors' manicured lawns. She didn't look back in the rearview mirror. An hour later, she crossed the state line, the flat gray highways of Ohio giving way to the rolling tree-covered foothills. She turned on the radio, finding a station playing classic rock, and turned the volume up loud enough to drown out any lingering thoughts of table settings and floral aprons. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, Tyler, Jessica, and Richard Vance would pull up to a dark, freezing house. They would find a locked door, a cold oven, and a piece of paper telling them exactly how little control they truly had. The panic would set in. The scramble for reservations at places that had been booked solid for months. The realization that they had brought the CEO of the company to a dead end. But Amy wouldn't be there to see it. She reached her hand back, scratching Barnaby behind the ears. He leaned into her touch with a contented groan. "Just you and me, buddy," Amy whispered, a genuine wide smile spreading across her face as the first silhouette of the mountains appeared on the horizon. "Just you and me, and a whole lot of quiet." For the first time in 30 years, she wasn't someone's mother, someone's maid, or someone's ATM. She was just Amy. And as the car climbed higher into the crisp mountain air, she finally felt like she could breathe. The Blue Ridge cabin smelled of old pine, wood smoke, and absolute freedom. Amy woke up on Thanksgiving morning not to the shrill panic of an alarm clock, but to the soft golden light filtering through the A-frame windows. For a long time, she just lay under the heavy patchwork quilt, listening. There was no hum of the refrigerator working overtime. There was no clattering of pans, no mental checklist of boiling times and baking temperatures running on an endless, exhausting loop in her head. The only sound was the gentle rustling of the wind through the barren branches outside, and Barnaby's rhythmic breathing at the foot of the bed. She stretched, her spine popping in quiet relief, and swung her legs out of bed. She pulled on her thick fleece sweatpants and a heavy wool sweater. Walking into the small, rustic kitchen, she didn't look at a recipe card. Instead, she took out the $14 jar of truffle honey, the wedges of imported brie and sharp cheddar, and a box of plain crackers she had picked up at a gas station on the way in. She poured herself a mug of the cabin's complimentary instant coffee. It tasted slightly burnt and wonderful, and sat on the wooden deck overlooking the sweeping, mist-covered valley. She sliced a piece of cheese, drizzled it with the expensive honey Jessica had demanded, and took a bite. It was earthy, rich, and deeply satisfying. She tossed a small cube of cheddar to Barnaby, who caught it with a soft snap of his jaws. At noon, when she would normally be sweating over a hot stove, frantically trying to time the gravy with the mashed potatoes, while Tyler complained about the Wi-Fi speed, Amy was walking along a dirt trail, listening to the crunch of frost beneath her boots. She didn't check her phone. She had turned it off completely and shoved it into the bottom of her duffel bag. 400 miles away, in the gray, freezing suburbs of Ohio, a pristine white Tesla Model Y glided onto Amy's street. Tyler gripped the vegan leather steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was sweating inside his tailored charcoal suit, despite the frigid temperature outside. Beside him, Jessica was reapplying a layer of nude lip gloss, peering into the sun visor mirror. She wore a cream-colored cashmere turtleneck and designer-tailored trousers, an outfit specifically chosen to look effortlessly wealthy and casually sophisticated. "Did you text her to make sure the lobsters are out?" Jessica asked, snapping the mirror shut. Eleanor Vance has a weird thing about the smell of seafood lingering in a house. Amy needs to have the exhaust fan on high. "I texted her an hour ago," Tyler muttered, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. A sleek black Lincoln Navigator was following closely behind them. Richard Vance and his family. "She didn't answer," She's probably just up to her elbows in flour or whatever she does. Tyler pulled into the driveway, the Tesla's tires crunching softly on the dead leaves. He parked, and the Lincoln Navigator pulled in right behind him, effectively blocking him in. Tyler unbuckled his seatbelt, forcing a wide, confident smile onto his face as he stepped out into the biting November wind. He walked back to the Navigator, greeting Richard, a tall, distinguished man in a dark wool overcoat, and his wife Eleanor, who was adjusting a silk scarf around her neck. "Welcome to my mother's home, Richard Eleanor," Tyler projected his voice, aiming for the perfect pitch of a humble yet successful corporate leader. "It's nothing extravagant, but she's very traditional. Put a lot of heart into this." "We appreciate the invitation, Tyler," Richard said, his breath pluming in the cold air. "It's generous of your mother to accommodate us on such short notice. Let's get inside. It's freezing out here." Tyler led the procession up the concrete walkway. Jessica walked beside Eleanor, already launching into a practiced, bubbly monologue about the neighborhood's quaint Midwestern charm. Tyler reached the front porch first. He reached for the brass doorknob, completely ignoring the piece of heavy cardstock taped at eye level. He turned the knob. It didn't budge. He rattled it, a sudden spike of irritation flashing hot in his chest. Why would she lock the door when she knows we're pulling up? "Mom!" he called out, knocking sharply on the heavy wood. "Mom! Open up! It's freezing!" There was no answer, no sound of footsteps approaching, no muffled barking from Barnaby, just the hollow, dead echo of his knuckles against the wood. It was then that Tyler finally looked up and saw the note. The heavy packing tape caught the dull gray light of the afternoon. The black Sharpie ink was neat, measured, and completely devoid of emotion. "I am away for the holiday weekend. The house is closed. Please make your own arrangements." Amy Tyler's brain simply refused to process the words. He read them once, twice, 3 times. Away? Closed? It was Thanksgiving Day. It was 1 o'clock. She was supposed to be wearing the blazer. The lobsters were supposed to be boiling. He turned around, his confident smile completely gone, replaced by a pale, twitching mask of confusion. "Is everything all right, Tyler?" Richard asked, stepping up onto the porch, his hands shoved deep into his overcoat pockets. Eleanor and Jessica stopped on the steps below them. Yes. Fine. Totally fine," Tyler stammered, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. He let out a forced, high-pitched laugh. "You know my mom, she's getting a little older. Probably just ran to the corner store for some extra ice and locked up out of habit. Give me 1 second." He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed Amy's number. It didn't even ring. It went straight to a generic, automated voicemail. "The number you have reached is not available." "She's not answering?" Jessica asked, stepping up to the door, her eyes landing on the note. The color completely drained from her face. She looked at Tyler, her mouth opening and closing silently. She recognized Amy's handwriting. "I'm going to check around back," Tyler said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into genuine panic. He looked at his boss. "Richard, I am so sorry about this. Just give me 2 minutes. She's probably in the backyard." Tyler practically sprinted down the side of the house, his expensive leather dress shoes slipping on the frosted grass. He reached the back patio. The house looked utterly dead. The blinds were drawn. The chimney was cold. He pressed his face against the sliding glass door leading to the kitchen, cupping his hands around his eyes to block the glare. It was dark inside, but he could see enough. The kitchen counters were completely bare. No pots, no pans, no cutting boards. Nothing. It looked like a staged model home, sterile and abandoned. Desperation, hot and blinding, surged through him. He couldn't go back out to the driveway and tell the man who controlled his future that his mother had abandoned him on Thanksgiving. He couldn't admit that there was no food, no warmth, and no welcoming family. If he could just get them inside, he could order takeout, make up an excuse, a medical emergency, a sudden illness, anything to save face. He needed to get inside, now. He ran to the small utility room window near the back door. It was an old, single-pane glass window. He looked around frantically, his eyes landing on a decorative brick edging his mother's flower bed. He didn't think about the consequences. He didn't think about boundaries. He only thought about the regional director promotion slipping through his fingers. Tyler grabbed the heavy brick, wrapped his suit jacket sleeve around his hand, and smashed it against the glass. The glass shattered with a loud, sharp crack, sprinkling the frost-covered patio with jagged shards. Tyler reached his hand through the broken pane, feeling for the interior latch. He found it, flipped it, and shoved the window up. He was halfway through the window, his suit pants catching on the wooden frame, when the noise started. Beep, beep, beep. It wasn't a standard smoke detector. It was the high-decibel, ear-piercing shriek of a ring alarm system. Amy had installed it 3 months ago after a string of porch piracies in the neighborhood. Tyler had actually mocked her for it, calling her paranoid. He had completely forgotten it existed. The siren cut through the quiet suburban afternoon like a physical blow. It was deafening. Flashing red lights pulsed from the control panel visible in the hallway. Tyler fell backward onto the patio, landing hard on his tailbone, gasping for air. "Turn it off," he yelled at the empty house, his hands covering his ears. "Shut up." He scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt and frost off his ruined charcoal suit, and ran back toward the front of the house. He rounded the corner just in time to see Richard Vance pulling his wife back toward their Lincoln Navigator, looking alarmed. Jessica was standing on the lawn, covering her ears, staring at Tyler in absolute horror. "Tyler, what on earth is going on?" Richard shouted over the blaring siren. "Why did an alarm just trip?" "It's a malfunction," Tyler yelled back, his voice cracking. "The system is old. Just wait, it'll shut off." It didn't shut off. Next door, Martha stepped out onto her back porch. She was holding a steaming mug of tea, completely unbothered by the cold or the noise. She watched Tyler with the calm, detached interest of someone watching a documentary about insects. She didn't call out to him. She just watched. Less than 3 minutes later, the wail of police sirens joined the mechanical screaming of the house alarm. 2 local precinct cruisers came tearing down the street, their light bars throwing frantic red and blue shadows across the manicured lawns. They swerved into the driveway, boxing in both the Lincoln Navigator and the Tesla. 4 officers stepped out, hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. "Stay where you are. Keep your hands visible," the lead officer barked, pointing firmly at Tyler, who was standing near the porch, panting, his suit torn at the knee and dirt smeared across his cheek. "Officer, wait, this is a misunderstanding," Tyler stammered, raising his trembling hands in the air. "This is my mother's house. I'm Tyler. I was just trying to get inside." "Is that your mother's note on the door, sir?" the officer asked, gesturing toward the packing tape and the cardstock. "Yes, but she didn't mean it like that. She just—" "Turn around and place your hands flat against the siding of the house," the officer commanded, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Right there, in the freezing cold, under the harsh glare of the flashing police lights, Tyler was patted down and roughly turned around. An officer clicked a pair of heavy metal handcuffs around his wrists, securing them behind his back. "You're detaining him for trying to get into his own mother's house?" Jessica shrieked, finally snapping out of her paralyzed state. She rushed forward, her cashmere sweater completely useless against the biting wind. "We have guests. Do you know who that man in the car is?" "Ma'am, step back onto the sidewalk," the second officer warned, holding up a hand. "We have a tripped silent alarm indicating a perimeter breach, a shattered rear window, and a written notice that the homeowner is away. Until we establish residency or get the homeowner on the line, he is a breaking and entering suspect." Tyler stood shivering on the frost-bitten grass, his hands bound, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He slowly turned his head to look at the Lincoln Navigator. Richard Vance had rolled down his window. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't demanding answers. He was simply looking at Tyler with an expression of profound, chilling disgust. Richard was a man who valued order, integrity, and family above all else. What he was witnessing was a chaotic, humiliating display of a son trying to break into his absent mother's home, lying to his boss about the arrangements, and getting arrested on Thanksgiving Day. Richard slowly shook his head, tapped his driver on the shoulder, and rolled the window back up. "Wait," Tyler yelled, struggling against the officer's grip. "Richard, please let me explain. It's just a mix-up." An officer approached the Navigator, spoke briefly with Richard, and then motioned for the cruisers to shift slightly, clearing a path. The heavy black SUV reversed out of the driveway, the tires crunching over the dead leaves, and drove smoothly down the street, disappearing around the corner. With that single quiet departure, Tyler watched his promotion, his salary bump, and his entire meticulously crafted corporate future vanish into the cold Ohio air. It took 30 humiliating minutes for the police to verify Tyler's identity, contact the alarm company, and officially rule the incident a domestic dispute rather than a felony burglary. The lead officer uncuffed him, his face stern. "Listen to me, son," the older cop said, handing Tyler back his driver's license. "Your mother left a note. The house is locked. The heat is barely on. We checked the digital meter. She doesn't want you here. Go home." The cruisers pulled away, leaving a deafening, crushing silence in their wake. The neighborhood was completely still again. The inflatable turkeys on the surrounding lawns bobbed cheerfully in the wind. Tyler stood in the driveway, rubbing his raw wrists. Jessica stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, shivering uncontrollably. Her perfect hair was windblown and tangled. "What do we do now?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling, stripped of all its usual Instagram-ready confidence. Tyler didn't answer. He just stared at the dark, cold house. The house he had called a dump. The house he had viewed merely as a free venue. He realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that he had no idea how to turn on his mother's oven, let alone cook a Thanksgiving meal. He had no idea where she kept her spare blankets. He had no idea how to function without her quiet, invisible labor holding his life together. An hour later, the white Tesla pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of a Speedway gas station off the interstate. It was the only place open for 20 miles. Inside, beneath the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights, the aisles were mostly empty. Tyler, still wearing his torn, dirt-stained suit, walked over to the refrigerated grab-and-go section. He stared blankly at the meager offerings. He reached out and grabbed 2 prepackaged turkey and Swiss sandwiches sealed in hard plastic triangles. They were slightly damp, the bread looking pale and sad. He grabbed a bag of generic potato chips and 2 bottles of tap water. He walked to the register, pulled out his credit card, the one that was nearly maxed out from the Tesla down payment, and paid the cashier, who didn't even look up from his phone. Tyler and Jessica sat in the front seats of the expensive electric car, the heater blasting, staring out at the desolate gas pumps. They opened the plastic triangles. The smell of preservatives and cheap deli meat filled the cabin. There was no organic turkey, there were no lobsters, there was no truffle honey, no imported cheese, no sparkling cider, there was no promotion. Jessica took a bite of her cold, soggy sandwich. A single tear escaped her eye, ruining her carefully applied mascara, and tracked down her cheek. She didn't take a picture of it. She didn't post a boomerang. She just chewed in absolute, defeated silence. Tyler rested his head against the steering wheel, the cold leather pressing against his forehead. He closed his eyes, the memory of his mother's neat, uncompromising handwriting burning behind his eyelids. "Make your own arrangements." For the first time in his life, the bill had arrived, and there was absolutely no one left to pay it but him. The morning after Thanksgiving, the internet in the affluent suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, was unusually active. Black Friday shoppers were scrolling on their phones while waiting in lines, and the local community Facebook groups were buzzing with the usual complaints about traffic and parking. Jessica woke up at noon in her heavily mortgaged 3-story townhouse. Her head throbbed from crying, and her stomach felt hollow from a dinner consisting entirely of stale gas station chips. Tyler was downstairs, aggressively pacing the hardwood floors while leaving desperate, unanswered voicemails for the HR department at his company. Jessica sat up, pulling her silk robe tightly around herself. She needed to control the narrative. If word got out about the police cruisers at Amy's house, or the fact that Tyler's boss had witnessed the entire humiliating spectacle, their social standing would evaporate. She reached for her pristine iPhone, her thumbs hovering over the Facebook app. She knew exactly how to play this. She uploaded a carefully selected photo from 2 years ago, a picture of her and Tyler looking distressed but resilient during a delayed flight. She applied a muted, black-and-white filter to give it a somber tone. Then she began to type, utilizing every buzzword she had learned from online wellness influencers. "I rarely post about private family matters, but yesterday Tyler and I experienced something truly traumatic. We arrived at my mother-in-law's house for a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, arms full of gifts, only to find the house abandoned, freezing, and locked. No warning, no explanation. We were left stranded in the cold. It breaks my heart to see Tyler so hurt by the woman who raised him. We suspect she is going through a severe mental health crisis, but to purposefully sabotage her only son's holiday and humiliate him in front of his employer who was joining us is a level of toxicity I'm struggling to process. Please send prayers for our family and for her wherever she is. Hashtag family first, hashtag mental health awareness, hashtag setting boundaries. Within an hour, the post had accumulated over 200 likes and dozens of comments from their superficial social circle. "OMG, Jess, I am so sorry," wrote her bridesmaid Chloe. "That is actual abuse. You and Tyler deserve so much better," added Madison. The echo chamber was working perfectly. Jessica watched the sympathy roll in, feeling a warm, vindicating glow settle in her chest. She wasn't the villain. She was the victim of an unstable, vindictive older woman. 2 houses down from Amy's dark, quiet property, Martha sat at her kitchen table. She had a mug of Earl Grey tea in one hand and her iPad propped up against a fruit bowl. She was an active member of the Oak Creek Neighborhood Watch Facebook group, where someone had just shared Jessica's public post with the caption, "Did anyone see police at the widow Amy's house yesterday? Is she okay?" Martha adjusted her reading glasses. She read Jessica's tearjerker post twice. She didn't feel anger. She felt the cold, sharp precision of a surgeon about to remove a tumor. Before Amy had left for the mountains, she had forwarded Martha a few crucial items. One was the temporary access link to her Ring doorbell camera, just in case the police needed footage of a break-in. The other was the batch of printed screenshots from the iPad. Martha had spent her Thursday evening scanning those screenshots into crisp, undeniable PDF files. Martha clicked on the comment section of the shared post. She didn't use emojis. She didn't offer a preamble. She typed with the steady, measured cadence of a retired educator who was entirely out of patience. "This is a remarkable piece of fiction, Jessica," Martha wrote. "Since you brought a private family matter into the public square, let's provide the neighborhood with the missing chapters." Martha attached the first file. It was a clear, high-definition clip from the Ring camera. It showed Tyler, red-faced and screaming, smashing the utility window with a brick, followed by the blaring alarm, his cowardly fall into the dirt, and his subsequent arrest by 2 local precinct officers, while Richard Vance looked on in absolute disgust. Then she uploaded the second file, a collage of the WhatsApp screenshots. The text was undeniable, glowing against the white background of the comments section. "Just secured the bag, ladies. The old lady is covering the entire Thanksgiving spread. She's completely obsessed with being the martyr mother. Once he gets the promotion, we are strictly doing holidays at resorts. I can't have Amy waddling around looking like a cafeteria worker." Martha finished her comment with a single devastating sentence. "Amy isn't suffering a mental health crisis. She simply stopped funding your Aspen ski trips and paying for the groceries you threw away. The house is locked because the Bank of Mom is permanently closed. The internet is a creature that feeds on drama, but it absolutely gorges on hypocrisy exposed." Within 15 minutes, the comment section completely flipped. The polite sympathy vanished, replaced by a torrent of outrage from neighbors, local business owners, and people who had known Amy for decades. Chloe and Madison frantically deleted their supportive comments. Jessica's phone began vibrating endlessly, not with notifications of support, but with furious direct messages and laughing emojis. Jessica stared at the screen, the color draining from her face, her carefully constructed, expensive world collapsing into digital dust in real time. She frantically hit the delete post button, but it was far too late. The screenshots had already been saved, shared, and forwarded across town. 2 weeks later, early December, the air in Ohio was bitter and thick with the threat of snow. Amy's 10-year-old Honda pulled into her driveway. She put the car in park and turned off the engine, but she didn't get out immediately. She sat for a moment, looking at her house. She looked different. The exhausted, graying woman who had fled 14 days ago was gone. She had stopped at a salon in Asheville on her way back and chopped off the heavy, damaged length of her hair, opting for a sleek, modern bob that framed her face. She wore a tailored wool peacoat over a crisp white turtleneck, and her skin had a healthy, wind-kissed flush from hours of hiking the mountain trails with Barnaby. She looked 48. She looked alive. Parked directly in front of her garage was the white Tesla. Tyler and Jessica were sitting on the front porch steps. They looked horrendous. Tyler was wearing yesterday's clothes, his face unshaven, his eyes rimmed with red. Jessica wore no makeup, her hair pulled back into a messy knot, her designer clothes looking suddenly cheap and rumpled. Amy unclipped Barnaby's leash, grabbed her duffel bag, and walked up the driveway. Her posture was completely straight. Tyler stood up as she approached, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask how her trip was. You ruined my life, Tyler spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer panic. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied? Richard fired me on Monday. He completely bypassed human resources. He said a man who breaks into his mother's house and lies to his executives lacks the ethical foundation required to represent his company. I was escorted out of the building. Jessica stood up behind him, her arms crossed tight. The whole town is treating us like pariahs because of what your crazy neighbor posted. We had to cancel the Aspen trip. We're 2 months behind on the townhouse mortgage because we put the Tesla down payment on the credit cards expecting Tyler's promotion bump to cover it. We have nothing. Amy stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Barnaby sat patiently at her heel. She looked at her son, really looked at him. She saw the entitlement, the weakness, the utter refusal to take accountability. You didn't have nothing, Tyler, Amy said, her voice eerily calm, cutting through the freezing air like a surgical blade. You had a mother who loved you enough to empty her retirement accounts for you. You had a home that was always open. You had hot meals, clean sheets, and endless support. You threw it all away because you thought I was stupid. I am your son, Tyler yelled, his voice cracking. You are supposed to help me. You need to call Richard. You need to tell him you had a misunderstanding with the medication, that the alarm was a glitch. You need to fix this. Amy walked past him, her boots clicking sharply against the concrete. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Tyler and Jessica quickly followed, desperate, expecting the familiar routine, expecting Amy to sit them down, make a pot of coffee, and pull out her checkbook to make the bad things go away. Instead, Amy left her coat on. She walked directly to the small writing desk in the living room, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a heavy, thick, black 3-ring binder. She turned around and dropped it onto the glass coffee table with a loud, authoritative thud. What is that? Jessica asked, her voice faltering. That, Amy said, pointing at the binder, is 10 years of accounting. I'm a bookkeeper, Tyler. Did you really think I didn't keep track? Tyler stepped forward, his eyes darting to the black cover. Open it, Amy commanded. Tyler hesitated, then reached out and flipped the heavy cover open. The first page was a printed Excel spreadsheet. It was itemized, dated, and categorized. The $3,000 for your rent last July, Amy read aloud from memory. The $4,800 for the HVAC unit you never paid me back for. The $2,000 for Jessica's bridal shower catering. The groceries. The utility bills I covered. The car insurance premiums I paid when you forgot your password. Amy watched the blood drain from Tyler's face as he flipped through the transparent sleeves holding bank statements, cleared checks, and printed text messages promising repayment. The grand total, adjusted without interest, is $45,620, Amy said. Mom, this is insane, Tyler gasped, stepping back from the table as if the binder were radioactive. Families don't invoice each other. Families don't call each other cheap lawn chairs in group chats either, Amy replied, her tone completely level. They don't use each other to fund luxury cars while making them scrub toilets. You wanted a corporate relationship, Tyler. You treated me like a vendor. So I am acting like one. Amy reached into her purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper, already stamped by a notary public. She placed it on top of the binder. This is a promissory note. It legally acknowledges your debt of $45,000 to me, to be paid in monthly installments over the next 5 years. You are both going to sign it right now. Jessica let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Are you out of your mind? We don't have jobs. We're not signing anything. If you don't sign it, Amy said, looking directly into Jessica's wide, panicked eyes, I will take this binder straight to the civil courthouse tomorrow morning. I will file a lawsuit for financial abuse and fraud. Given the police report from Thanksgiving and the public knowledge of your character, how do you think a judge will rule? And more importantly, how do you think that public lawsuit will look to any future employers Tyler tries to interview with? The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a trap springing shut. Tyler looked at the binder, then at the promissory note, and finally at his mother. He searched her face for the familiar softness, the guilt, the desperate need for his approval. He found nothing but granite. His hands shook as he picked up the pen resting beside the paper. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He simply bent over the table and signed his name. He handed the pen to Jessica, who was weeping silently, her mascara running down her cheeks. She snatched the pen and signed. the paper tearing slightly under the pressure of her furious, trembling hand. Amy took the paper, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her purse. "Now," Amy said, walking over to the front door and pulling it wide open, letting the freezing December wind sweep into the hallway. "Get out of my house and lose my number." They didn't say a word. Tyler kept his head down, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat as he walked out the door. Jessica followed closely behind, refusing to look back. Amy stood in the doorway, the cold air rushing past her, and watched the white Tesla pull out of her driveway and disappear down the street. She closed the door. The deadbolt engaged with a satisfying, heavy click. She was entirely alone, and she had never felt lighter in her entire life. 3 days later, a soft blanket of snow covered the neighborhood, turning the lawns into pristine white fields. Amy was in her kitchen, wearing a comfortable pair of jeans and a soft cashmere sweater she had bought for herself in Asheville. She was listening to a jazz record and brewing a pot of real high-quality coffee when the doorbell rang. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door, expecting a package delivery. When she opened it, she blinked in surprise. Standing on her porch, lightly dusted with snowflakes, was Richard Vance. He wasn't wearing his intimidating tailored corporate overcoat. He wore a heavy-knit fisherman's sweater and dark denim jeans. In his hands, he held an enormous, beautifully wrapped gift basket from the high-end artisan market downtown, the kind of place Amy had always browsed but never bought from. "Mr. Vance," Amy said, genuinely caught off guard. "Please call me Richard," he said, offering a warm, slightly apologetic smile. He held out the basket. "I know this is incredibly forward of me, dropping by unannounced, but I felt I owed you a profound apology for the intrusion on your property during Thanksgiving." Amy hesitated, then pushed the storm door open. "You don't owe me an apology, Richard. You were brought here under false pretenses. Please come inside. It's freezing out there." Richard stepped into the foyer, wiping his boots carefully on the mat. He handed her the heavy basket, which smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans, dark chocolate, and smoked meats. He looked around the entryway, taking in the warm lighting, the spotless hardwood floors, and the subtle, elegant pine garlands Amy had hung up just that morning. "You have a beautiful home, Amy," Richard said softly, turning his attention back to her. Tyler had painted a very different picture of his upbringing. Having seen the full context of what happened that day and hearing the rumors around town, "I just wanted to say that I have an immense amount of respect for a person who knows how to draw a hard line." Amy felt a sudden, unexpected warmth rise in her cheeks. For the first time in over a decade, a man was looking at her not as a mother, not as an employee, and certainly not as a caterer. He was looking at her as a woman. "Thank you, Richard," Amy said, her voice steady and warm. "It took me 48 years to learn how to draw it, but I'm finding that the view from this side is much better." Richard's smile widened, the lines around his eyes crinkling with genuine charm. He glanced toward the kitchen, where the jazz music was playing softly. "I smell fresh coffee," Richard said, his voice dropping slightly, losing any trace of corporate formality. "If you don't have anywhere to be, I'd love to hear more about that view. Assuming, of course, the house isn't closed to all guests." Amy looked at the man standing in her hallway. She thought about the empty, quiet years she had spent folding herself small to fit into the background of someone else's life. She thought about the $45,000 promissory note sitting securely in her desk drawer and the brand-new passport she had expedited in the mail just yesterday. She smiled, a bright, radiant expression that reached all the way to her eyes. "The house is open, Richard," Amy said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the kitchen. "I just only let the right people in now.